there really is a tired faith on a lot of people. It's not that they don't have faith. You always have faith. But sometimes that faith gets a bit shipwrecked, sidelined, and there's a lot of tired faith. There's a lot of battles, when you're just nonstop, pressing through things. Just when you get on the other side of one, here comes another one, the enemy's got a pretty big arsenal. And so faith gets tired, and I know that. My faith has gotten tired. And so this message will turn tired faith into refired faith, okay? Come on, absolutely. And some of you might remember that we're here or that we're online listening. I mentioned Psalms 11:3, that it says, if the foundations are destroyed, diminished, damaged, what can the righteous do? And the implied answer is very, very little. But what's interesting is what it says before that. There's a bit of a context, and it says this: the enemy makes ready their arrows to shoot in darkness at the upright in heart. The enemy makes ready their arrows in darkness, to shoot in darkness at the upright in heart. Now, this means a couple of things. Number one, there is a domain of darkness. There's an unseen realm. There's the second heavens where the demonic realm is. It's very active, and things are being shot our way, attacks, assaults. It just happens. And from that unseen realm, you don't see it coming, and boom, there it is. But also it speaks of sometimes we're in a dark place. You know what I'm saying? We're in a dark season, a dark situation. And so, there is the weaponry that the enemy uses because of conditions and circumstances around us that we're going through. But the implication is foundations make the difference between winning and losing. It's really, it's talking about the foundations are being spoken about in the context of battle. So the overcoming is really tied to what? The foundations. And so it is the nature of foundations. And we understand that often you don't see them because, they've been laid and we tend to take those things for granted because they're not always so obvious or they come very familiar with us. But, in Luke chapter 6, Jesus talked about someone that built their house on a foundation, the rock foundation, and someone that didn't. And the storms came against both. You're going to get hit no matter what. Storms are coming. They just are. One of the implications of the shield of faith is that you need one. Missiles are coming and whatnot. But the difference between the one that was damaged, the one that was destroyed, and the one that wasn't was what? It was foundations. It was fundamentals. We've been ministering to people for 40 years. And relationships, marriages, friendships, business relationships, you name it. And I can tell you, without maybe a rare exception, it all comes down to a foundation was AWOL. A fundamental was missing. Really. It's often just that humility, a little bit of teachableness, forgiveness, serving. Often it's the fundamentals, it's the foundations where you can find where this thing is unraveling and being damaged. So, here is another one of our unshakable foundations. And so if you want to turn, whether you have it on your phone or you have the paper version, in Genesis chapter 15, we're going to look at such a significant, unshakable foundation that is so essential and so critical to our faith. And Abraham, he was not called Abraham yet. His name hadn't been changed till chapter 17. God meets him, we find, in chapter 12 and 13. This is the third time that we have recorded conversation between God and Abram. And of course, God had promised you're going to have a son, you're going to bear fruit, you're going to be the father of nations. Many years had passed by now, and he was getting a little bit nervous about it, thinking, wow, maybe not. So he says to God, how about Eliezer? Let Eliezer, who was born in my house, be my heir. And then we picked up the story then. This is Genesis 15. And this will be in verse 4. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man will not be your heir, but one will come forth from your own body to be your heir. And he took him outside and he said, now look toward the heavens, count the stars, if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he, that's Abram, believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. With something so obvious here, Abram believed in what? The word. He believed the word that God spoke, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness or right standing with God. So, and we can see from this the genesis of any partnership we're going to have with God in any area of our life. You know, just a relationship with him or partnering with him in our family, our parenting, in our workspace, whatever it might be. It all starts with trusting his word, believing his word, needing no other evidence other than the fact that he said it. That's how that's just a pattern. It doesn't change. And this is really, really good news for us. The reason why it's such good news is because all of us have that. We have a faith, we have a capacity to trust. It's not based on how much money we have, our culture, our church background, our age, our skill set. You know, there's a lot of those things that are different that we don't have. But one thing that we all share is our capacity to trust, our capacity to believe a word. And so and it shouldn't be strange to us because really pretty much in all of life, we really operate that way. I mean, when you go into a restaurant to order a meal, you first have to believe their advertisement. You have to believe the words, the information that says first of all, they got food, right? And second of all, they have good food. So it all starts at that level. So any partnership, and this is great news, that you're going to have with God is tied to the fact that you take him at his word. It all starts with believing his word. Now, that being said, what is the goal of going into a restaurant? Is it to, read the menu and order food? No, the goal is what? To have food. That's exactly right. That is the goal. If I promise Connie to take her out for dinner for her birthday, right? It's important that she believes me for the health of the relationship and for the purpose of getting ready to go, right? But the goal is not her believing me. You imagine I make a promise to her and she believes me and that's it. Okay, you believe me? That's the goal. That's the end product. You believe me. It's not. The goal is to experience that meal, to experience that promise. And what Abram says next proves that. We see that in the very thing he says next. And keep reading from verse 6. And he believed the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And then God said to him, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur, out of the land of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to possess it. Okay, now he makes a promise. Now I'm giving it to you to possess. But notice what Abram says. He says in verse 8, O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? First, he believes God, then he says, how may I know that I will possess it? Now, in today's kind of vernacular parlance, when someone uses language like that, it almost sounds like doubt. Like, how do I know that's really going to happen? How do I know you're really going to do that? How do I really know? So when we hear that, we tend to think that's some kind of wobble in his faith, but that's not the case at all. Because there is a very big difference between our believing and our knowing. To believe is a capacity to trust. It is pre-wired. We all have it. In fact, you have to learn unbelief. You have to learn doubt. You literally have been created just to trust, to yield, to be open, to receive. And it's through disappointments in relationships and whatnot that we actually learn unbelief. So to believe is important, it's significant, but to know is actually the possession part of it. And that word know is yada, which means to experience it, to see it, to handle it, to know it experientially. And so he wasn't doubting the promise, he's now pursuing it. He believed, I believe the promise, but now, it's not about pie in the sky, it's about steak on the plate. When I first married Connie 40 years ago, I believed that she loved me. 40 years later, I don't believe it anymore, I know it. There's a lot of Christians that are stuck kind of in the belief state. And don't get me wrong, it is important, but that is not the goal. That's not what Jesus paid for. And the difference is so stark, and we're going to look at a little bit of this. This is not just a play on words. It really isn't. There is such a big difference. And we find this all over Scripture. Ephesians 1:18 and 19. Paul said, I pray that you might know what is the surpassing greatness of his power towards us who believe. I pray that you would know what you first believe. John 6:69 says, we have believed and have come to know that you're the Holy One of God. We have believed and now we've come to know that you are the Holy One of God. 1 John 5:13, these things are written to you who believe that you might know. So there's a big difference between belief, which is significant, it's important, but it's not the goal. And often we get stuck, we camp out around that. Now here's a new thought for some of us in here. The veracity of any belief is predicated upon the fact that it can be known or is known. The strength, the truth of any belief is based upon the fact that it has been known or it can be known. I've never been to Tibet, ever. How many would agree that I'd bet my life on it? And that bet would be 100% credible. It would. If I had to make a bet, I would bet you, and the cost of this bet is, my life. We know why, even though I've never been there, never been to Tibet, but because it's known. It can be known. That's what gives integrity to that belief. If it's not known or can't be known, it's not a belief in God in this context. In the U.S. judicial system, we don't just have judge, we have a judge and a jury system. A judge basically manages the court, the proceedings, but the jury makes the final decision of guilt or innocence. And did you know that in the judge and the jury will believe based upon what witnesses know? Hearsay evidence. You know what I'm saying? Hearsay. In fact, they don't believe just, in other words, if a witness gets up in the stand and says, I believe this person is guilty because someone told me they saw him having a bad day. You have a belief. A witness having a belief does not draw faith out of the jury. You see, faith is designed to connect with knowing. It doesn't start with your knowing, it starts with his knowing. That's why faith in God, faith in Jesus is the most powerful, pure of all faith. Why? Because he's the ultimate known. He is. He's the great I am. All of creation knows of God. Romans 1:20. Since the beginning of creation, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature has been clearly seen, clearly known. See? That's why faith, when you partner your faith with Jesus, it is the ultimate. There's nothing more authentic, there's nothing more pure, and there's nothing more powerful because it's tied to what's known, or the, as I can put it, the knower. And, of course, one more example of this is in John chapter 4, the story of the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. She has this encounter with Jesus. And she goes into a place of knowing. She experienced. He spoke things that only she would have known. And that word of knowledge. And she goes back to the city and begins to tell the Samaritans that he told me everything about myself, even though I said, man, it doesn't look like he said everything. But, when you're getting impacted in an experience like that, it sure feels that way. And so this is what it says. This is what they said. They said, it's no longer because of what you said we believe. We believe because of your knowing, right? But now we've heard for ourselves and we know. It's what they said. It says that it's no longer because of you that we believe, but because we've heard for ourselves, we know it. It's our experience. Our believing was rooted in your knowing. Now it's rooted in ours. That's the goal. It's a big difference. There's a lot of people whose believing is just based in their believing. And that's a great start. That's how partnerships with God begin. But that's not where it's supposed to stay. Where you're believing now, your faith is rooted in that knowing and in that experience. Faith responds because of what someone else knows, but it advances by what we come to know. Faith responds. Your faith has a capacity to respond because of what somebody else knows. You can trust that. But then it matures, it advances because now it's tied, it's rooted in your own experience and in your knowing. Amen. So, question, does faith alone make it ours? No. If it did, then why would Abram ask how? If we think faith alone makes it ours experientially, then we fall into what I call a faith and our faith syndrome, and that's when your faith gets tired. Faith in a belief can morph into faith in the fact that I believe. Faith in a belief can morph into faith in the fact that I believe. I mean, the greatness of your faith is not determined by its possession, but by its position or its placement. It's not what we have, it's where we put it. And this, some of you will remember what was called the faith movement of the 70s and 80s. And, of course, when I first got born again, I listened to Hagin and Copeland and just getting faith in me. But there was a real trap, a real pitfall that came with that. And they, like I said, it became a faith in your faith. They organized faith right out of God. They really did. It's like the man who was working in his garden out in the back, and he kind of cuts his finger, and he comes into the house and shows it to his wife, and she says, you may need to go down to the hospital and let them help you with that. And so he goes down to the nearby hospital, and he goes through the emergency room doors. And he comes to two doors. One says male, the other says female, so he goes to the male door. And then he comes to two more doors. One says over 40, the other says under 40, so he goes to the under 40 door. Then he comes to two more doors. One says upper body, the other says lower body. So he goes to the upper body door. Then he comes to two more doors. One says internal, the other says external. So he goes to the external door. Then he comes to two more doors. One says serious, the other says not so serious. So he goes to the not so serious door, and he's back in the parking lot. When he gets home, his wife asks him this question: did they help you? He said, no, but they sure are organized. Anyway. So Abram believed God, but now he's asking how. He's got the why and the what. The why and the what isn't an issue anymore. He's got that. But the how. And the next thing God does is the answer. In verse 17, verse 18, well, first God said to him, take these animals, a 3-year-old heifer, a cow, 3-year-old female goat, 3-year-old ram, Why 3? Good question. A turtle dove and a young pigeon. Bring these, and he cut them in half except for the birds, and he made them in a figure 8. And then here in verse 17, and it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven, a flaming torch, passing between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant for Abram. On that day. That was the difference right there. God made a covenant for Abraham. A covenant is the most powerful agreement, the most sacred of commitments. I mean, because it's not just giving possessions. It's not just giving time. It's not just giving talents. It's the giving of self. I mean, when I married Connie, I didn't just get good Mexican food. I did get that. But I got Connie. I mean, think about it like this, that God entrusted the well-being of humanity in the context of marriage and family. That's covenant. Think about that. Knowing the adversary, knowing the enemy, knowing the assault. Think about that. God knew the battles we were going to have. God knew the enemy's arsenal. And he stuck us all in the covenant of marriage and family because there's nothing more powerful. There's nothing that digs deeper into the well of God's provision and the provision of creation like the commitment, the covenant of marriage and family. And hence why the enemy hammers it over and over again, because covenant is so powerful. It can't be defeated when we continue to build it his way. Now, what's different and wonderful about this covenant is that God made a covenant where Abraham and his offspring, us, were the beneficiaries of the covenant. But he was not, nor are we, the second responsible party that the security of the covenant rested upon. See, the agreement or the covenant was made in the Godhead, and it rested solely on God's character, so neither Abraham or any of us could pollute it, could destroy it. I mean, if we look, in fact, it talks about in verse, let me get back to that, in verse 17, there appeared a smoking oven, a flaming torch passing between the pieces. That's the pre-incarnate Christ. Go to the book of Revelations. It says the picture of Jesus in his glory. His eyes were a flame of fire, and his feet were burnished bronze. So this was a covenant in the Godhead being made on our behalf, which is pretty good. That's really, really good news. So it's the covenant, which is God's commitment to us, which is the enforcer of the promises. Believing a promise, as important as it is not the enforcer of the promises. The promises don't enforce themselves. They don't. God's commitment, God's covenant is what makes all the difference. I mean, if you have a contract between two people, the law is not going to back up that contract because of well-written promises or well-memorized, no matter how well you have it memorized. You can have it so memorized, so well written, but what makes it backed up by law is what? Signature. Without a signature, in other words, it's backed up by one, the commitment of that person, their character, their integrity, who they are. It's the same thing with God. I mean, God backed this thing up by the blood of his own son. When we look at Calvary, we see that commitment, that covenant, that sacrifice. I mean, I love the cross. I really do. There is so much in that. When you look at the cross, you are just reminded of just his commitment, being all in. You know, some of you may have heard this before. One of my favorite little stories, a little Jewish boy who is failing at math to the chagrin of his father. And he gets desperate. And so he takes his son out of Hebrew school and put him in a Catholic school. And so within a matter of a month, his son is getting top marks. He's topping the class in mathematics. And his father is very happy but rather confused. So he says to his son, he says, listen, son, I'm thrilled to see that you're doing so well in math, but what's the difference? When you were in Hebrew school, you were failing miserably. Now you're in Catholic school. I mean, you're making top marks. What's the difference? And the boy said, well, Daddy, when I saw that man nailed to that plus sign, I knew they were serious about math. Now let me just say this. That being said, we are fully committed because he is. See, that actually is the foundation for our commitment. Our commitment has to have a foundation bigger than just us, and that's him. There is a reciprocation. When you're in a covenant relationship and all has been given for you, there is an ability and a grace for the return of that. Marriage is supposed to be like that. You know why marriage works? Because two people are all in. If one person isn't all in, then the one that is all in can't put all in. You can't. It's impossible. They can't be received. They can't be valued. They can't exchange. So you may have one person, they're all in. All of me, whatever it is, I've given you all of my life for this relationship. But you'll never see it in that relationship. Why? Because the other side hasn't been all in. So the reason why we can be all in, the reason why we can be so committed is because he's committed. It's rooted in that. That's the reminder. That's the refresher. If you're trying to live from the strength of your commitment, boy, you're going to wear out. Because our commitment moves from the strength of his, which we see in the covenant, which we're reminded of over and over again. And we find a very interesting example in which I love this, David's moment with Goliath. We see this, how this stands out for us. And for 40 days, the army of Israel had been, Goliath came out on the battlefield. The armies, the Philistines and Israel had lined up opposite one another, and normally they were going to have a big battle. Goliath shows up and says, hey, listen, I'm the champion of the Philistines, send me your champion, and whoever wins, that will determine who serves who. And for 40 days, man, nobody stepped forward. They were shaking in their boots. They were being intimidated for 40 days. And David shows up with lunch around the same time that Goliath is making his challenge and throwing out all his insults. So this was David's response, or part of his response. He said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? Now let's just slow down a little bit. Uncircumcised. Why was David, why was he pointing to making mention of a specific part of Goliath's anatomy? Because you know where they do circumcision. Yeah, come on, don't get weird. It's just a fact. And so, why did the uncircumcised guy, was that just sort of male bravado? Was that just trash talking? No, it's not. It's not. We know what it is. In Genesis 17:11, we see that God gave circumcision as what? A reminder of covenant. Basically, he was saying, they don't have covenant. They don't have that God's commitment to them. Circumcision was a reminder of that commitment, that covenant, that price that's been paid. That's why communion is, let me back up, just mention this, because we see an example of how knowing pulls out faith to activate something. David had to get Saul's permission. There's no way, because if they were going to give someone permission to fight, they were risking their lives. They were risking their future. People don't realize, Saul exercised a lot of faith in David. But what did David have to do? He had to show him what he knew. I fought a lion. I fought a bear. It was not what David believed, but it's what David knew. Can I just say this? That lost, dark lost world out there, people are going to respond in faith because of what we know, not because of what we believe. That's what draws faith out of a dark heart. Somebody's knowing, somebody has an experience, real, it's authentic. If we think we're going to win the world just because of what we believe, we are greatly mistaken, because everybody believes something. It's not what we believe. At 1 John, what we have seen, what we have tasted, what our hands have handled, we give to you. Amen. And so that's what happened. David shares what he knew. It pulls faith out of Saul, which gives him permission to go into the battlefield. That's pretty amazing. It really is. Just an example of that. And of course, when David fought Goliath, he didn't fight Goliath from the strength of his faith. He fought Goliath from the strength of covenant. I mean, the language he uses. David said, in verse 45, 46, I come to you in the name of the Lord. The Lord will deliver me. The battle belongs to the Lord. He's using covenant language, God's commitment. That's what he's using. And that's not suggesting that he was a party to it. He participated. It was due diligence on his part. But he wasn't approaching Goliath from his ability to throw stones. He was approaching it from the place of covenant, God's commitment. And then finally, from Exodus 3, and then through the book of Joshua, throughout the book of Joshua, we find Israel in two very different seasons under two very different leaders. We find one season was Moses delivering Israel out of Egypt. They're in the wilderness. And wilderness really is a place of survival. At least it was for them. Just surviving a wilderness. And Joshua was about thriving in promised land, possessing promises. They were kind of just going around, believing something, but yet Joshua was actually releasing something. And there's two significant crossings or transitions that kind of typify the difference between Moses' leadership and Joshua's leadership, or those two seasons. How was the Red Sea parted? It was the extension, the raising up of Moses' gift, Moses' mantle, Moses' staff. And thank God for gifts and ministries. And there's some breakthroughs we never get. There's some bondage we never come out of unless there's somebody with a gift and a grace and a faith and a sacrifice that will take a stand for us. That is so true. It's a big deal. We don't diminish that. Never diminish Moses in the process of embracing Joshua. In fact, quite frankly, take Moses out of the picture and there's no Joshua. Or at least there's no Joshua leading people into the promised land. So we honor that. We honor and cherish and need the gifts and the graces of God to get out of bondage, but to go in and possess promise, that was something completely different. How do the waters of Jordan separate? It was when the Ark of the Covenant, right? The Ark of Testimony was carried on the shoulders of the priests. There's a plurality of priests. The Ark of the Covenant, his presence. And every Israelite had to walk past it. Every one of them walked past it, and they looked at it. And it was the same thing, everybody. We're going to possess our promises because of his covenant. Not because of our expertise. Not because of our skills. We're going to have expertise. We're going to have skills. We're going to have resources. We're going to have relationships. And the enemy loves to sell us the lie that now that we got our stuff, we're going to win. That is a setup for disaster. You can't win against the second heaven demonic realm with our stuff. It's with his covenant, his commitment, his nature, who he is. There's nothing like it, and there's a lot of people's faith that's tired because your faith is carrying a weight in a battle, and yet it's not, your faith isn't, it's weary from the battle, but it's missing the fact that, wait a minute, my faith can't be in how much faith I have to get through this. My faith must be in the one that got me through this. Because you're putting a demand on your faith without your faith putting a demand on the covenant. If people are putting a demand on their faith, but their faith is not putting a demand on the covenant. And that's the difference right there. And the enemy, he might be defeated, but he's not stupid. If you think the enemy is stupid, you're in trouble. He's not stupid. And he knows how valuable faith is. He understands what goes on with us in faith and the things that happen, and he disconnects that from the demand that we make on his covenant, his commitment, his nature. I tell you, I've discovered this more in the last 3-4 years than my entire life, going through what I did with my son Adam when he was diagnosed with cancer in 2018. Having cancer this year myself, it's like, wow. Is important and is significant as these resources, these spiritual resources that God has given to me that functions in my life, and I see the fruit of that in so many areas. That is not the foundation. That is not really the source of, it's his commitment. It's his covenant. It's unstoppable. My faith is stoppable. His isn't. And so there are people that are in here and you've got some tired faith. It's not that anything is wrong with your faith. It's just your faith needs to put a demand, not just on itself, but a demand on the covenant, his nature. And for me, I believe, I'm thoroughly convinced that's the difference between victory and loss in my life. It really is. You come to this place, and this is a good place. Has anybody ever recognized this? Notice that God will often ask you to do what seems extremely difficult or even impossible. Anybody notice that? Anybody ever feel like, boy, this is so difficult? And it is impossible. This is an impossible life. Christianity isn't you living for God. If you think so, boy, you're in for a real disappointment. We can't live for God, but God can live through us. Christianity is not you living for God. Christianity is God living through you. And yes, all those things do fire in your relationship, and you do reciprocate faith, and you do reciprocate and participate and partner, but 99.99% of the victory equation is still tied to who he is and what he accomplished. And every day in our battle, we get to be reminded, and it's a good thing, or maybe every week or every month, we get reminded that, wow, man, God's all in. I might be down, but God's all in. I might be wore out, but God's all in. That makes all the difference. That's why you can have faith as a mustard seed. It can be minuscule. It can be so tiny. It's like fissile material. A small amount of fissile material creates this huge nuclear reaction and explosion. It can be so small. But when it's being, what they do is they take an electron beam and they bombard the atom. That's what they do. They bombard it. And they keep bombarding it. It begins to kind of move and vibrate, and then it kind of depresses. But they keep bombarding it until this thing explodes and opens up. That's kind of what happens with our faith. His presence, his goodness, the revelation of his commitment, his heart, his covenant just keeps bombarding us, just keeps hitting us. And of course, we have to choose to allow that to happen. So I want to pray. If everybody just bow your head for just a moment. If you've got tired faith, and it's tired. I mean, it's like you're just dragging a foot. Just, wow, I'm tired. I'm weary. Holy Spirit, we thank you for faith. You gave us your faith. You gave us a gift of faith. You gave us a measure of faith. And we thank you for how special it is and how we get to choose how to exercise it. But Lord, thank you that it's the covenant. That's the enforcer of the promise. Our faith in the promise doesn't enforce it. It's your commitment, your sacrifice, your unrelented presence and position with us, towards us, and for us. So, Father, we want our faith refired. We need it fired afresh right now. And I'm going to ask you this. If you feel like and you may only have tired faith in a specific area. It doesn't mean all your faith is tired. Doesn't mean it's that way in every area of your life. But if you're here and you got some tired faith, maybe it's in work, it's in finance, it's in marriage, it's in maybe your own physical well-being, whatever it might be, certain relationships. If you know that, boy, I've got some faith, my faith is weary in this area, I want to pray for you. Would you just stand to your feet if that's you? You got some tired faith. I just want to pray for you. We're going to refire your faith by realigning where the real sacrifice, the real commitment, the real enforcement is. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Father, would you let us see Calvary again? Would you let us see that payment made again with our name on it? Your sacrifice. You being all in ever before we could. We can't be all in unless you are, and you are. It's the only thing that fires up our faith. Father, in Jesus' name, I pray for a revelation of your commitment, a revelation of your sacrifice, a revelation of your all in, a revelation of your covenant that can't be polluted or distorted or diminished even by our bad days and our rough ways. We got the enemy coming in and trying to disconnect us from the strength of it because we messed up here, or we don't have this, or we don't have that. It's all a lie. A problem on our side does not translate into a diminishing on his. In Jesus' name right now, I want you to see that area, and I want you to see that he is not backed off at all. We may deny him, but he can't deny. We may be faithless, but he's always faithful. Calvary, that cross, that sacrifice. That's why we take communion. We continue to declare his death. Why do we declare his death? We declare his sacrifice, his payment, his commitment. He's all in, the covenant. It's the covenant. That's why we do communion. The circumcision of heart is the reminder, wow, look what God did in me, regardless of a rough moment, a rough season, or a rough day, but you've got circumcision of heart. And then it was buried, that old enslaving lifestyle was buried in the waters of baptism, but the circumcision of heart, that reminder, wait a minute, that's not me. That's not who I am. That's not what you've done. Father, in Jesus' name, I just thank you right now to see your commitment, to see your covenant, to see your payment for that area of their lives. In Jesus' name, Father, faith would arise. All the dust, all the crustiness on it, just barely getting by. In Jesus' name, I pray for refired, refreshed faith right now in your sons and daughters in that specific area. Right now. Right now, in Jesus' name, they're no longer going to look at that place and feel condemnation or weariness or despair or whatever it is that just is pulling them down. In the name of Jesus, refired, refreshed, restored faith, because you are the enforcer. Your commitment, your covenant, that cannot be diminished in any way. In Jesus' name. And all God's people said, can we give God a praise for his covenant, the price he paid?